Welcome to Mystical Love and Virtue, the Ethos of Freemasonry, with me, Chuck Dunning. This video essay is based on an essay that was originally published in the Plumb Line, the quarterly journal of the Scottish Rite Research Society in 2021, and then slightly edited to become the third chapter of my third book, A Rose-Croix Oratory, published in 2023. While this essay specifically addresses and draws examples from Freemasonry, I think the essential points are also relevant to Martinism, Rosicrucianism, and similar traditions. Primarily in terms of Platonic and Aristotelian thought. This essay conducts such an examination to arrive at a more complete understanding of Freemasonry's ethical ideals. Beginning with development of working definitions for love and virtue, we proceed to consider how they are related, how Freemasonry urges us to more fully embrace them, and finally ponder their most profound possibilities. The English word love, as both a verb and a noun, refers to a range of meanings that are separately named in other languages. Among the ancient Greeks, agape, eros, and philia are among several terms used to distinguish one form of love from another. In Albert Pike's Morals and Dogma, the insights of Plato and his teacher Socrates are repeatedly referenced with regard to love. This fact is not surprising, given that Plato's dialogues, Phaedrus and Symposium, composed around 385 to 370 BCE, are generally regarded as two of the ancient world's most insightful dialogues on the nature of love. These works focus on eros as the most fundamental form of love. In fact, over 3 centuries prior to them, Hesiod claimed that eros was the fourth of all the gods to appear. In the generation just before Socrates, Parmenides even positioned eros as the first of the gods. These observations are significant because in Phaedrus, when Socrates reveals his own views on love, he starts by praising it as the god Eros, whom he refers to as the son of Aphrodite, the goddess of love. Love's divine status is important because, as Socrates states, quote, "For if love be, as he surely is, a divinity, he cannot be evil." End quote. His definition first and foremost establishes love as essentially and truly good in a way that cannot be undone by human beings. A similar view would be asserted hundreds of years later by the earliest Christians. Quote, "God is love, and those who abide in love abide in God, and God abides in them." That's from the first epistle of John, chapter 4. Following Socrates' lead, the definition of love for this essay begins with its divinity. Whether regarded as a deity itself or an attribute of a single all-encompassing deity, love is here considered so fundamentally real and essentially good that it is ultimately beyond human corruption. As with all things divine, it must also remain somewhat mysterious, having dimensions transcending the limits of our senses, comprehension, and control. Nonetheless, for humans to have a useful definition of love, we must further qualify how it can be known and expressed by us. On this point, it is again noteworthy that Plato's dialogues focus on eros as the fundamental form of love. In its most rudimentary sense, eros is simply our attraction to and desire for beauty. The basic truth of the relationship between eros and beauty is literally expressed in English by referring to beautiful things as lovely. A range or scale for this relationship is illustrated in Symposium when Socrates recounts how Diotima of Mantinea, who is a priestess and his teacher, explained love to him as an ascent, which later scholars have treated as a metaphorical ladder. The first and lowest rung is the love that is the attraction and desire to more fully experience the physical beauty we perceive in a particular thing or person. This view of love is the basis of how people most commonly understand Eros today. The second rung is love as an appreciation for the physical beauty found in many things and uniquely expressed through the differences of each. A love for minds is the third rung, which is valuing an inner beauty, not dependent upon external appearances. The fourth rung is love for laws and institutions which characterize beautiful societies. A love for the sciences and participating in the beauty of knowledge is the fifth rung of Eros. Finally, the sixth rung brings one to the love of beauty itself in its divine state, and it is here that the mystical potential of love is finally unveiled as revealed in Diotima's description. Quote, "When a man has been thus far tutored in the lore of love, passing from view to view of beautiful things in the right and regular ascent, suddenly he will have revealed to him, as he draws to the close of his dealings in love, a wondrous vision, beautiful in its nature. And this, Socrates, is the final object of all those previous toils. First of all, it is ever existent, and neither comes to be nor perishes, neither waxes nor wanes. Next, it is not beautiful in part and in part ugly, but existing ever in singularity of form independent by itself, while all the multitude of beautiful things partake of it in such wise that, though all of them are coming to be and perishing, it grows neither greater nor less, and is affected by nothing, so that in the end he comes to know the very essence of beauty." End quote. Before concluding this definition, two additional observations are made. First, this analogy shows that love is not merely a passive attraction and desire to experience beauty. As effort is necessary to ascend a ladder, so love also includes the active drive to pursue and express these qualities in our lives. Loving the physical bodies of other people and things moves us to connect with and care for them. In loving other minds, we naturally enter further into emotional, intellectual, and spiritual communion with them. The love of laws and institutions urges our participation in and service to them. The love of knowledge drives the pursuit of truth and science, experimenting and exercising the powers of observation, critical thinking, and precise communication. Second, the ascent of Diotima's ladder reveals not only an upward movement toward the spiritual ideal of beauty, but also an expansive movement that increasingly opens to a broader range of experiencing and expressing beauty. These active and expansive qualities of love are highlighted in Morals and Dogma when it says of Plato's philosophy, quote, "With him the inspiration of love first kindled the light of arts and imparted them to mankind. And not only the arts of mere existence, but the heavenly art of wisdom which supports the universe. It inspires high and generous deeds and noble self-devotion." End quote. In summation, love is here defined as a divine attribute which humans experience and express as a relationship of active and expansive attraction, desire, pursuit, care for, and participation in beauty, ultimately divine beauty. While Freemasonry is constantly speaking of specific virtues, the general meaning of virtue deserves closer scrutiny. The etymology of the term leads back to its first known use in Middle English in the 13th century to signify conformity to a standard of rightness. The word is derived from the Latin root vir or vir for man, and thence virtus or virtus, meaning manly or strong. Thus, virtue suggests the admirable qualities expected of mature men, or more inclusively, mature adults. Even so, this word may be somewhat misleading in that it has been used in translation of the Greek arete, which simply means excellence. With regard to virtue, arete specifically refers to excellence in moral thought and behavior, which at present we seek to define more comprehensively. Before advancing further into that task, it is necessary to do as was done in defining love, which is to acknowledge the divine basis of the various ways we recognize moral excellence. As is said in Masonic ritual, quote, "In man they are virtues, in God his attributes." End quote. As before, this recognition helps us be mindful of virtue's spiritual, even mystical depths, in that it is a way we may align or connect with deity. And it also reminds us that it will always retain a degree of mystery. Once again, it is worthwhile to return to Plato, because he has strongly influenced Freemasonry's view of moral excellence. Plato's works are where our four cardinal virtues, prudence, temperance, fortitude, and justice, were first written about as an integrated set. In Republic, Socrates declares, quote, "Virtue is a kind of health and beauty and good condition of the soul," end quote. And, quote, "Beautiful and honorable pursuits tend to the winning of virtue." End quote. Therefore, the excellences we recognize as specific virtues are those beautiful and honorable pursuits that benefit the soul, each in some particular way. It is significant that Socrates specifically references benefit of the soul. The Greek term for this good is eudaimonia, which is often simply translated as happiness or well-being. More literally, the word combines eu, meaning good or well, with daimon, meaning spirit. So eudaimonia alludes to an inner goodness or well-being. While philosophers frequently connect eudaimonia with the physical and social pleasantries of life, it should also be acknowledged that sometimes the good of the soul demands physical and even emotional suffering. Morals and Dogma emphatically makes this point. Quote, "Suffering is the discipline of virtue, of that which is infinitely better than happiness, and yet embraces in itself all essential happiness. It nourishes, invigorates, and perfects it. Virtue is the prize of the severely contested race and hard-fought battle, and it is worth all the fatigue and wounds of the conflict." End quote. The most common example of this discipline of moral excellence is suffering in the present with the understanding or hope that it eventually contributes to a worthwhile benefit for oneself or others, which is what often makes hard work virtuous. Another example is suffering and perhaps even dying in service to something judged a greater good, even without hope of any extrinsic benefit. This example is about doing good simply because it is good, such as unyielding commitment to a noble principle like truth, liberty, justice, or love itself. Such a commitment is often considered the epitome of virtue. Before leaving this point, it is reiterated that suffering is sometimes required by virtue, but not always. Suffering is neither a virtue nor necessarily leads to virtue. The difference is in what we do with it. To further clarify the nature of moral excellence, we now turn to Plato's student Aristotle. His Nicomachean Ethics from around 350 BCE remains a core text in academic studies of virtue. Within it, he elucidates additional aspects of virtue that distinguish it from other things. Quote, virtue then is a state of character concerned with choice, lying in a mean. In effect, the mean relative to us, this being determined by reason, by which the man of practical wisdom would determine it. End quote. So choice is central to virtue. Aristotle claims virtue is a choice to act based on a deliberate desire for the good. Such a desire is called deliberate because it arises with deliberation, or making judgments about what actions are and are not good. This understanding does not reduce moral excellence to a list of rules and regulations specifying the right and wrong things for every possible situation, as if such a list were even possible. Another import to this aspect of virtue is that it necessarily values a person's motives or intentions. On one hand, a person may choose to act with entirely good motives and intending nothing but good effects, but there may nonetheless be bad outcomes. On the other hand, a person may choose to act in such a way that has good results despite bad motives and intentions. The first case remains an example of virtue, but the second does not. So, due to the necessity of making judgments and to the relevance of motives and intentions, a proper concept of virtue includes recognizing individuals as moral agents with liberty to choose based upon deliberate desires. Aristotle applies a doctrine of the mean to virtuous choice. He argues that all moral excellences are not fixed conditions, but each is instead on a continuum between two opposing extremes, which are the vices of excess and deficiency. This aspect of moral excellence is classically illustrated with the virtue of fortitude or courage, holding the middle ground between rashness, the vice of excess, and cowardice, the vice of deficiency. The doctrine of the mean is helpful in part because it indicates a range of thinking and behavior by which one may be more or less virtuous, rather than removing moral excellence to a rarely attainable ideal of precision. It also provides a guide for exercising the practical wisdom of deliberation, which is to perceive the opposing extremes and choose a way of thought and action between them. Quote, neither by nature then, nor contrary to nature, do the virtues arise in us. Rather, we are adapted by nature to receive them, and are made perfect by habit. End quote. Aristotle thus addresses the necessity of habituation for instilling moral excellence as a matter of character. Repeatedly exercising deliberation and choosing to apply the doctrine of the mean results in consequences of pleasure and pain that refine one's ability to think and behave virtuously. Over time, one develops a more stable disposition to choose the good for its own sake, and to do so with less need for considering options. This observation reveals that, although the capacities necessary for virtue are innate, instruction and training help individuals learn to consistently apply those capacities toward moral excellence and thereby acquire virtue as a character trait. True virtue aims not only at serving the benefit of one's own soul, but also the souls of others. It is plainly logical that to be genuinely committed to the good for the sake of the good itself effectively requires the good to be served on behalf of everyone, everywhere, at all times. To desire and act for the good of all is thus the essence of justice. As Aristotle said, quote, justice in this sense, then, is not part of virtue, but the whole of virtue. End quote. The logic of this part of moral excellence is also innately driven, quote, since man is a political creature and one whose nature is to live with others, end quote. Such an understanding of humanity is reflected in the Master Mason's Beehive lecture. Quote, it might have pleased the great creator of heaven and earth to have made man independent of all other beings. But as dependence is one of the strongest bonds of society, mankind were made dependent on each other for protection and security, as they thereby enjoy better opportunities of fulfilling the duties of reciprocal love and friendship. Thus was man formed for social and active life, the noblest part of the work of God. End quote. In consideration of Plato's and Aristotle's thoughts on virtue, the following definition is offered. Virtue or moral excellence is a character trait in which one has become habituated to choose actions in the mean between excess and deficiency for the well-being of the soul in oneself and others, even if it requires suffering. Specific virtues, such as temperance, are therefore more categorical ways of thinking and acting that serve moral excellence. Up to this point, love has been addressed in terms of a relationship with beauty, and virtue as a relationship with goodness. However, Plato's philosophy strongly suggests a unity among beauty, goodness, and truth as interconnected divine attributes, or transcendental qualities of being itself. Aristotle makes this unity more explicit, and it is later fully asserted among Neoplatonists such as Plotinus and Christian theologians like Dionysius the Areopagite and Thomas Aquinas. Morals and Dogma summarizes this view when it says, quote, the true, the beautiful, and the good are not three distinct essences, but they are one and the same essence, considered in its fundamental attributes, end quote. In other words, they are only named differently because each represents a different category for how humans experience and conceptualize the single divine essence manifesting in the people and things of this world. The good is therefore beautiful and true. The beautiful is good and true, and the true is beautiful and good. It follows that love is not only oriented toward beauty, but also truth and goodness. Likewise, virtue not only works for the good, but also the beautiful and the true. Having established that love and virtue are both centered on the same divine essence of truth, beauty, and goodness, we now consider the similarities and differences in how they relate to that essence. To that end, each concept is examined by the other's definition. So, to what degree does virtue fit the definition of love? Is it active and expansive in its attraction to, desire for, pursuit of, care for, and participation in beauty? Let's begin by examining the active and expansive qualities. Virtue recognizes no limit or boundaries other than to avoid doing that which is not good. It does not regard the good or therefore the beautiful as something to know and do only under certain circumstances. It always seeks to serve and empower goodness and beauty for oneself and others. Attraction. Virtue includes an attraction to the good, and so also the beautiful. We must recognize and attend to goodness and beauty in order to understand and act with moral excellence. Desire. The definition of virtue specifies a deliberate desire for the good, and so it must also desire beauty. Desire for the beauty of goodness and the goodness of beauty motivates us to choose morally excellent thoughts and action. Pursuit. Virtue moves toward the ideal of the good in both thought and action, and in that way it does indeed pursue beauty, both intellectually and materially. Furthermore, virtue not only does so for oneself, but for others. Care. Virtue strives to maintain and protect the good, and therefore also does so for beauty. Participation. Virtue works toward the good of its own development and refinement in oneself and within society, and thereby actively participates in beauty. So, we can see that virtue clearly meets all the criteria for loving thought and action, and so it may be rightly said that moral excellence is inherently loving. Each specific virtue is therefore a more particular way of exercising loving thought or action. However, it is also apparent that virtue depends upon love. One does not seek to know and align with truth and goodness, and does not care about moral excellence if one does not first love truth and goodness. Now, to what degree does love fit the definition of virtue? Does it include serving the well-being of the soul for self and others, choice based on deliberate desire, residing in the mean, habituation, and the willingness to suffer? Let's consider the well-being of the soul for self and others. Love is recognized as divine, which means it is inherently good for one and all. Socrates points out that even when the divine madness of love drives people out of their senses, it is nonetheless a gift that attracts the human soul to desire eternal beauty and truth, and thus be drawn to the love of wisdom. We experience and express such goodness both privately and socially for our own benefit and that of others. Choices based on deliberate desires. Sometimes we instinctively appreciate and desire the beauty of people or things, so in that regard there is no choice. But love can also arise as a result of intentionally acting upon a deliberate desire to discover the previously unrecognized beauty and goodness in someone or something. In either case, we can and do deliberate and make choices about the time, energy, and means by which we attend to, strive toward, and join with the beauty and goodness we find. Residing in the mean. As previously noted, the most basic experience of love is simply our natural attraction to beauty and thus goodness. So it is our response to such attraction, our expression of love, that either is or is not chosen within the mean between excess and deficiency. For example, Aristotle claims philia, brotherly love or friendship, quote, is a virtue or implies a virtue, end quote, which we can therefore conceptualize as residing in the mean between extremes like disinterest and codependency. Habituation. Not all attraction and desire for beauty involves deliberation and choice. And so habituation cannot be part of every experience of love. Nonetheless, we can and do develop abiding appreciation for and even commitment to the beauty and goodness in things and people, despite our first reactions to them as being totally unattractive or even off-putting. Diotima's ladder illustrates how we can develop a stable inclination to recognize, desire, pursue, care for, and participate in increasingly elevated kinds of beauty and goodness. Willingness to suffer. As with virtue, love includes the willingness to suffer, but not necessarily suffering itself. It is universally observed that the stronger the love, the more willing one is to endure hardship and pain in order to pursue, care for, and participate in that which is loved. Even in the most basic form of eros, our willingness to experience or express the beauty and goodness of something or someone can be such a strong emotional reaction that we call it passion, the original meaning of which is endurance and suffering. People also freely choose the difficulties of all sorts of committed, loving relationships and knowingly take on the hardships of philanthropy, literally meaning loving humanity, in serving the great causes of liberty, equality, and justice. While our initial attractions and desires for beauty are good, these are often simply instinctive reactions, may not involve any deliberation or choice, are not necessarily the result of habituation, are not always restricted to a mean between excesses, but do include a willingness to suffer. So we see that virtue is only a latent potential at this small point of love's nascence in human experience. But it is not love's nature to remain limited to this point. Love's attraction to and desire for beauty draws it to actively expand beyond its most basic manifestations, and therefore into more demanding and rewarding ways of knowing and doing the good, the beautiful, and the true. Thus love has within it an inherent drive or natural inclination to increasingly develop itself with moral excellence. Consciously recognizing and choosing to engage that drive is the actualization of the virtue of love. Now we're ready to make a more detailed examination of love and virtue as it is illustrated for the Masonic ethos in our symbols and allegories. An ethos is the distinguishing moral character of a person, group, or institution. Perhaps the most well-known way our institution traditionally addresses its ethos is this, quote, "A peculiar system of morality veiled in allegory and illustrated by symbols," end quote. In other words, Freemasonry defines itself as a distinctively structured approach to goodness in human relationships, and thus also to their truth and beauty. A major peculiarity of our approach is the use of analogies with operative masonry and architecture in temple building, a body of lore well suited to metaphorically emphasizing the active and expansive qualities of love and virtue. These allegories and symbols are partly necessary because goodness, truth, and beauty are essentially divine, and therefore ultimately beyond the power of human language to fully capture. All attempts at revealing the infinite reaches of these transcendent qualities cannot avoid also concealing them in finite words and images. So, rather than merely provide limited answers to the great questions and challenges of moral excellence, Freemasonry ritually employs symbolism and allegory coupled with inspiring rhetoric to stir our appreciation, desire, and pursuit of virtue. Consider the initial words of a common opening charge. Quote, "The ways of virtue are beautiful. Knowledge is attained by degrees. Wisdom dwells with contemplation. There we must seek her." End quote. And reflect on these statements from a popular closing charge. Quote, "You are now to quit this sacred retreat of friendship and virtue, to mix again with the world. Amidst its concerns and employments, forget not the duties you have heard so frequently inculcated and forcibly recommended in this lodge. Be diligent, prudent, temperate, discreet. Let the world observe how Masons love one another. These generous principles are to extend further. Every human being has a claim upon your kind offices. Do good unto all." End quote. In passages such as these, our craft speaks to the interconnectedness of love and virtue, and continually encourages us to further investigate, test, and improve our moral understandings in direct application throughout our lives. Freemasonry thereby displays all the qualities in the present definition of love, illustrating the love of virtue as key to the Masonic ethos. In addition to the love of virtue, our ethos strongly admonishes us to recognize and act upon the virtue of love, and especially in terms of charity. This theological virtue stems from 1 Corinthians chapter 13, where the Apostle Paul describes all knowledge, talents, and works as lacking any virtue without love. He says that after all such things have passed, only faith, hope, and charity remain, and charity is the greatest. We see that placement of charity reflected in Freemasonry's allegorical depictions of Jacob's ladder and in this monitorial statement, quote, "Charity is the chief of every social virtue and the distinguishing characteristic of Masons. This virtue includes a supreme degree of love to the great Creator and Governor of the universe, and an unlimited affection to the beings of his creation, of all characters and of every denomination. This last duty is forcibly inculcated by the example of the Deity himself, who liberally dispenses his beneficence to unnumbered worlds." End quote. The divine nature of charity is also acknowledged when our ritual says it, quote, "extends beyond the grave through the boundless realms of eternity," end quote. In fact, Freemasonry's use of the word charity derives from it being an English translation of Paul's Greek word agape for unconditional and universal love. Therefore, when Freemasonry speaks of charity as our most important virtue, it admonishes us to recognize that there is nothing more virtuous than loving in a way that reflects divine love itself. This lesson is provided in many degrees, certainly including those of the Scottish Rite. One of the most noteworthy examples is in the degree of Knight Rose Croix, the 18th degree, where the theological virtues are revisited before teaching candidates to follow the new law of love, which, quote, "is recognized as the simple but sublime expression of the divine nature," end quote. In reference to the 26th degree, it is said, quote, "The true Prince of Mercy obeys the new law of love taught in the 18th degree. He imitates the mercy, goodness, and beneficence of God the Father in heaven," end quote. The 30th degree likewise addresses the supremacy of love with the mystic ladder of the Knight Kadosh, which is two-sided, each supporting the other. One side is denominated love of God, and the other side is labeled love of neighbor, with the rungs composed of various virtues and the 7 liberal arts and sciences. The mystic ladder thus illustrates the role of the virtues as parts of love, as well as the interconnectedness between love of deity and love of humanity. Furthermore, it reveals that the principles we usually call virtues are not our only tools of love. All the symbols, allegories, and charges of Freemasonry can be understood as means of magnifying our ability to love. For example, in striking resonance with Diotimus' speech in Symposium, the mystic ladder specifically presents the arts and sciences as vital to attaining the greatest heights of love. This fact also aligns with the Blue Lodge teaching that, quote, "truth is a divine attribute and the foundation of every virtue," end quote. For the arts and sciences are means by which we learn and communicate more truth, and thus more beauty and goodness. What we learn through the love of truth in turn empowers us to be more loving and morally excellent with our fellow human beings. Applying the word mystic to the Knight Kadosh's ladder may be more than a simple reference to its place in our mysterious rite. In parallel with Diotima's affirmation that the ascent of love can arrive in knowing divine beauty itself, the word mystic also speaks to the potential for a direct encounter with truth, beauty, and goodness in their divine unity. In fact, the saying ne plus ultra, literally meaning no more beyond, is traditionally associated with the 30th degree and the mystic ladder, indicating that it is either the degree's highest teaching or leads to the highest heights, or both. Here we recall the previous monitorial statement proclaiming charity as a supreme degree of love for deity and unlimited affection for all creatures, and with it the further declaration that, quote, charity is the brightest gem that can adorn our Masonic profession. Charity is the keystone to our mystic fabric, end quote. Indeed, approximately 450 years prior to the formation of the United Grand Lodge of England, the very influential theologian Thomas Aquinas argued that charity or love is at once a proper name for deity, the most excellent virtue, both the cause and the end of all other virtues, and the means by which we most immediately recognize union with deity. All our considerations in this essay are consistent with his view, and we can therefore regard the mystic ladder as revealing that Freemasonry's ethos is not only a reverent guide to good human relationships, but also a mystical discipline. It is an active and expansive praxis of love and moral excellence capable of contributing to the fullest possible communion with deity. This praxis may be summarized with words attributed to one of our traditional patrons, St. John the Evangelist. Quote, dear friends, let us love one another, for love comes from God. Everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. No one has ever seen God, but if we love one another, God lives in us, and his love is made complete in us. End quote. Far from being a mere code of right behaviors or a list of do's and don'ts, the Masonic ethos nurtures the love of virtue and teaches the virtue of love. It employs a ritualistic, symbolic, and allegorical revelation of profound ways of contemplation and action that arise from our attraction to the divine light of goodness, truth, and beauty. More importantly, it includes the freely chosen obligation to actively pursue those ways in the loving mutual support of kindred spirits and to extend them to all others. The Masonic ethos thus moves us to individually and collectively reflect, participate in, and commune with its ideal of that spiritual temple, that house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. Okay, that concludes this video essay. Because there were so many citations in the original essay, I've included 2 more slides for end notes taken from my original footnotes. Thanks for joining me in this exploration of the Masonic ethos. I hope you found something useful here. May the love of virtue and the virtue of love shine brightly in your life.